Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. It's great to see you. We've made it through another grueling season of Visiting Writers Series events, but we saved the best one for last. And that's our celebration of this year's UNT Rilke Prize winner, Allison Benis White. And we're thrilled to have her here. This is the 7th year now that we've presented this prize. And I said this briefly last night, but I'm exceptionally proud of the list that we've put together. And I feel like year after year we find some of the most exciting and convincing books that are being written by people who are what we call at the mid-stage of their career, people who have published at least 2 books previously and who are really writing that mature work for which I'm certain they're going to be recognized moving forward. And Allison's book, I think, is a fantastic addition. If you don't have a copy of it yet, make sure you get one. You saw the bookstore is out front. Grab copies. Afterwards, she'll sign copies of the book, so make sure you get a copy and get it signed. Tonight, she's also going to get $10,000. I mean, that's pretty good. Right, and we're going to have a little ceremony afterwards for that. But I just want to say, at this point, after 7 years of giving out this prize, I'm grateful for the efforts of my colleagues who have helped make these decisions. Bruce Bond and Jean Dubrow, who's off being a poet somewhere else tonight and can't join us. But poets are busy people, right? We're demanded everywhere. And I'm also really grateful for the support of Robert Upchurch, our department chair, and for the continued support of the college and David Holdeman, who really, I think, kicked this idea off those 7 years ago. So I'm grateful for all of that. Thank you. I want to introduce Megan Arlett, who's going to do a proper introduction for Allison this evening. But I want to point out that Megan, who is a PhD poetry student new to our program this year, won this year's Vortman Academy American Poets Prize. She also gets money, $200, not $10,000, but still $200 is pretty nice. And Allison chose her poem, and so we'll quickly celebrate that after. But I want to bring Megan up now to get things going. So.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. It is my great pleasure to introduce our guest, Allison Benis White. She is the author of Self-Portrait with Crayon, which received the Cleveland State University Poetry Center Book Prize. Small Porcelain Head, selected by Claudia Rankin for the Levis Prize in Poetry. And Please Bury Me in This, winner of UNT's Rilke Prize. She has received honors from the San Francisco Foundation, the Academy of American Poets, and Poets and Writers magazine, and is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Creative Writing at the University of California, Riverside. Tonight, she is here to share work from her Rilke Prize-winning book. Please Bury Me in This is a book-length sequence of monostitches, startling fragments, each with their own integrity and argument, all gesturing towards the deep chasms left behind in the wake of 4 suicides and the loss of a father. Please Bury Me in This is a fragmented love letter, an exceptional elegy. The book opens by telling us there is a strong body of evidence that suicide is still contagious, which speaks to how this work encapsulates grief not just as a singular endured emotion, but a kind of collective experience, something truly inescapable. The tension between one person's experience of grief and the external world is a place where language begins to fail. Yes, language is always lacking in some way, but this inadequacy is multiplied when trying to encompass grief. She says, I'm writing to you as an act of ending, and I'm writing to you as an act of immolation, relief. In this, we see the book as an attempt at closure that recognizes the limits of language. The best we can do is use writing to brush up against what grief is. The poems reference expansively Virginia Woolf, Sylvia Plath, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, images of the Holocaust, and endless tombstones arranged like crops. Quoting another lost woman, she writes, I see the world through human eyes. And this is, of course, the only way we can see or experience anything, from a single, flawed perspective that stands starkly beside the book's multiple voices. Her work has been described as undeniably genuine, beautifully disturbing, and reaching toward the inaccessible. please help me welcome Allison Benis White.
Thank you so much, Megan, for that beautiful introduction. Can you hear me all right? Is this good? Okay, thank you. So I want to also thank the faculty judges of this award, Corey Marks and Bruce Bond and Jean Debrow. I also want to thank Lisa Vining and the students at UNT for being such excellent hosts. It means so much. And thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it. This prize means a great deal to me for so many reasons, one of which is its namesake, Rainer Maria Rilke, who has been instrumental in my life as a writer, specifically in his book Letters to a Young Poet. Here's probably the most quoted portion of that book, as he writes to a young would-be poet who has sought out his guidance. And this is from a letter written from Paris in February 1903. Rilke writes, "You ask whether your verses are any good. You ask me. You have asked others before this. You send them to magazines. You compare them with other poems, and you are upset when certain editors reject your work. Now, since you want my advice, I beg you to stop doing that sort of thing. You are looking outside, and that is what you should most avoid right now. No one can advise or help you. No one. There is only one thing you should do. Go into yourself. Find out the reason that commands you to write. See whether it has spread its roots into the very depths of your heart. Confess to yourself whether you would have to die if you were forbidden to write. This, most of all. Ask yourself in the most silent hour of your night, must I write? Dig into yourself for a deep answer. And if this answer rings out in assent, if you meet the solemn question with a strong, simple, I must, then build your life in accordance with this necessity. Your whole life, even into its humblest and most indifferent hour, must become a sign and witness to this impulse. So, when I was finished with graduate school with my MFA, I was restless. I was questioning whether I wanted to continue to write, if I needed to continue to write, as I come to the consciousness that the measure of my existence as a writer was going to come after graduate school, as there were no more required workshops, there were no more thesis hours, no more required seminars, and also even the ego, gratification, of creating poems and being supported in creating those poems. Even that had started to fade for me toward the end of my graduate studies. And I was aware of how challenging a writer's life would be, how much rejection I would face, and the extraordinary patience I would need to muster in order to make anything alive. So I asked myself, I did the Rilke challenge. I asked myself, must I write? And it took me about 6 months to answer that question, because I decided in seeking an answer that the best way to achieve that answer was abstinence, was not to write for a while and to see what daily life would be like. And also, I had a boyfriend at that time who was working in computers. He was normal, and I thought maybe I can be normal. And this impetus to create art and the responsibilities that came with it, maybe that would evaporate if I just surrendered this. And so after 6 months of this experiment, of this challenge that Rilke suggested to this young poet, I felt a tremendous loneliness that I had never experienced before. And it was a loneliness that was bordering on despair. And it wasn't a social loneliness. It wasn't a need for other people. It was something thicker and stranger than that. I felt hollow. I felt depressed. So I came to understand that without writing, which was my inner life, that I would suffer greatly. And I came to the conclusion that without writing, that I would die. Not physically, but intellectually, emotionally. And so, therefore, my answer was, yes, I must write. I had what Robert Frost calls the condition. So, and here's what he says. He says, a poet is not a profession. It's a condition. I also like what Louise Glick says. She says it's not to be a poet is not. She says it's an aspiration. It's also not a profession. So I have this condition. I have this aspiration that seems permanent. So as a result of this condition, I've written 3 books, and so I'm going to read a little bit from my first 2 books, and then I'll read mostly from Please Bury Me in This, which I'm very grateful to have received the Rilke Prize for. My first book, Self-Portrait with Crayon, began when I found a postcard of Degas' combing the hair in London, and it's a really interesting Degas. I was familiar with Degas' paintings, as most people are. It's mainly of dancers, but this postcard, this painting, was more of a domestic scene of an au pair combing the long red hair of her charge. This girl, maybe 13, and she's in pain, it seems, from having her hair brushed. She has her arm and hand curled into her chest, and I was really just fascinated with the tension between the women in this painting, and it's completely orange and red. The whole thing is on fire, and I was very attracted to this. And so I bought the postcard, and I brought it home, and I set it on my desk. And then a couple weeks later, I decided as a writing exercise to respond to this image. And I wasn't conscious of the word ekphrasis, but I knew that poets sometimes wrote in response to paintings. So I did this exercise and just wrote in response to this image. And I found, to my surprise, that I was able to write about my mother abandoning me when I was a baby, somehow in response to this image. And I'd never been able to write about that before. And I mean, it's the event of my life at that point. And in earlier attempts, the poems had come out, I felt like they were hysterical, and we came to the same conclusion. So I had abandoned the effort, but somehow I was able to articulate. So I tried the experiment again with his painting Dancers in Blue, and it worked again. And somehow I remember thinking, well, if I have a first book, maybe these Degas poems would be a section of that book. But I became fluent, and I ended up with, over a number of years, a manuscript-length number of these pieces, and I'll read the first 2 for you. And you'll see that the poems, sometimes, I'm only going to read 2, but sometimes the sketch or the sculpture or the painting make themselves available in the middle, sometimes in the beginning, sometimes at the end. In this first poem, the sketch becomes apparent in the middle of the poem. From Degas' sketchbook. The hidden are alone too. I crouched in the closet between my mother's skirts and shoes, where the legs should be. Whether I was quiet or not, I would be found. It was an obvious place. Her clothes and shoes. I only have to say it once. I don't say anything because the game requires silence. This is an external narrative. when I was small. It would be easier to fold in half or not say anything. People lose their minds and leave in the middle of cooking salmon. I will tell you something quietly. We tried to send her a birthday card, but it was returned. Wrong address. It is common to know very little, if anything. The point is to stay calm, to be found before you disappear. Not blank or colored in yet, but the outline of upturned hands and a quick circle for a mouth. Sometimes the face is so specific and the body is just penciled lightly in. It would be easier to finish here, before the tenderness of the figure is gone and the silk of the slip sewn inside my skirt as I sat carefully in the dark. It is so close to being skin. People exist for as long as possible until it is too difficult to matter. The shoulders are the span of the hanger, and the mind is the hook which suspends the entire dress. And the second poem is in response to his painting, Waiting. And I saw this painting by surprise at a museum in California. I was just moving around, and there it was. And it was, mostly when I wrote these poems, it was in response to art books and meditating on the images in these rather large art books. But I didn't really make a note of how large these paintings were. And it was so odd to see this painting in person because, A, it was much smaller than I thought it was. And B, I felt almost like meeting someone that you've only spoken to or communicated with online. It was uncomfortably intimate to look at this painting in person after I had meditated on it as an image in a book for so long. So I maybe meditated a little too long. It was weird. Like I couldn't maintain eye contact with this painting. So for whatever that's worth. But this is Waiting. I think of broken snow, but this is permanent. Two separate women on a bench, crossed at the wrists. Her hands could make a smaller version of the dancer unlacing her shoes. Or maybe she's just clutching her ankle in order to communicate a small but consistent pain. The kind that makes you look at pictures because words are not sufficient to describe it. God said, just float on a black lake like a child floats on her back to stare at stars. Let go. Watch cool paper boats. But I'm afraid of black water and the way women ignore each other at restaurant counters. One sips her coffee while the other draws circles on a paper napkin. When a child throws a stone into a lake, God is pleased and opens in rings, then fades to prompt the child to throw again. When I hear her set her coffee back on the counter, I look at my napkin to pretend I'm occupied with my love of circles. This could be an aerial sketch of twirling ballerinas, I think, each dancer ignoring the small white pain in her ankle, like a moon incessantly reflected in a lake. When a child floats on a paper boat, she wonders, where do stones go after they've pleased God? This is a hinge at the end of a lake boat. But I still don't know how to draw the fear of separation. We were alone for a long time. After many years, God said to the child, there are hundreds of wet stones in your mouth, and inside stone, the possibility of black, unopened umbrellas. So the second book that I wrote, also triggered by loss of a woman, which seems to be one of my central themes. So this book was triggered, Small Porcelain Head, was triggered by the suicide of my dear friend. And we were invited to a viewing of her body, which I was terrified to see. I had never seen somebody so young that was not alive. And so I went, and she was perfect. She was beautiful. She looked like she was sleeping. She was on a table, not in a coffin. And she looked like Snow White in her glass coffin. And I touched her, and of course she was cold and hard as marble. And I remember there was an eyelash, stray eyelash on her cheek, and I wanted to take it. And I remember thinking about the logistics of that, of how I could keep it, how I could get it home, where would I put it, how would I retain it, and then to what end. And I think in some ways that anecdote reflects the nature of this book, meaning trying to keep what cannot be kept. And so in order to enter into that material, I was able to create my own mythology, my own image system, which was centered in the image of a doll as a stand-in for the newly dead body, as a way to engage with and interact with someone who no longer lived as a child, interacts with a doll by speaking to it and creating stories about it and pretending that it's alive, often in a maternal fashion. And these poems, in comparison to Self-Portrait with Crayon, which was written from a space of endlessness, of waiting. This book was written in a space of feeling that there was no time at all, that there was no time to waste. So the poems were very compressed, and there was no space to meander. One had to say what one needed to say swiftly. So I'll just read, I think 3 or 4. They're very, very short. And they don't have titles, as they're all sort of exist, as it seems to be my nature, under the title of the book itself, which is Small Porcelain Head. And this is from, I think, the second section of the book. If description is a living thing, dark cherry hair and glass eyes tilted away, I want to say something that will look at me. If to memorize is to adore and cannot afford distraction or a socket neck that rotates the head away, if death is turning away with long brown human hair revolving like a globe from every angle, the back of her head. Just as the cork descends from the neck to permit a release from pulling, the body in one hand, the head in the other, separation is revelation. Just as the body is now headless, waiting, as if the motive to live was loneliness, the body remembers a head, opens its arms romantically. I live to miss you. Unlike the other automatons who lift a hand mirror or balloon, she exists when we close our eyes, slapping one small brass cymbal into another, frantically, to prove touching. The arm is wood and narrows into the wrist, small as I want. To have one thing I love carved from everything. A wooden hand is a hand without fingernails, sanded palm and the color of skin, an oar rowing in air. Then a windmill from the hand, as in human profiles cut into trees with a knife, to people sailing. When I have a headache, I lift my hand over my eyes. If death is a failure of imagination, we are alive. So this third book, Please Bury Me in This, is a book-length series similar to Small Porcelain Head. But this book meditates on language and bereavement, and it's also written in the wake of losses, specifically the loss of my father and also the loss of, insanely, other women to suicide. And I was asked in an interview rather recently, was writing about these losses an act of reliving the losses? And it made me think of my friend Jessica and what she said in response to our friend Nicole's death, who I wrote about in Small Porcelain Head. She said when Nicole took her life, it was as if a door opened to a room that I didn't know existed. And that resonated with me immensely. And so to think back to that interviewer's question, writing this book or these books is not an act of reliving, but this book is absolutely written in that room. And as each subsequent loss occurred, that room became more and more bizarre. That was a book of matches that served as my bookmark, FYI. So this book, Please Bury Me in This, is an epistolary book. It's a book written as a series of letters, and it's a book more than anything that's dreaming of a reader, it's dreaming of a listener, one who is as bewildered and desperate as the writer. This book is also about the nature of language, the act of reading and writing itself. And in the speaker's search for communion via language, several poems refer to writers, like this was mentioned by Megan, like Anne Sexton, Virginia Woolf, Emily Dickinson, Clarice Lispector, and just as a heads up, the writers like Woolf in particular, who seems to show up a lot in this book, they're referred to only by their last name as an act of gesture toward familiarity and as a shorthand. And so I'm going to read, I'll read from the first section of Please Bury Me in This, and then I'll read a few from the rest of the book. And these poems, like Small Porcelain Head, they don't have titles. They all exist under the umbrella title of Please Bury Me in This. And so I'll read the dedication and the epigraph, which also I think further locates the speaker. For the 4 women I knew who took their lives within a year. For my father. And this epigraph is from the New York Times in August 2014. Mental illness is not a communicable disease, but there is a strong body of evidence that suicide is still contagious. Underneath each seat was a small box we were asked to open. In the living room once, white balloons twisted into the ghosts of animals. How the snow globe, when shaken, relives the same shatter. The sick mind is beautiful and cannot sleep. Like a string of glass beads wrapped several times around my neck. When I close my eyes, I can only imagine blindness as darkness, death as not thinking. I am writing you this letter. I am trying to understand sentences as paintings of windows in the room where I'm alive. Looking up in the dark, I thought, tell me something you've never told anyone. I tried in the closet, but the rope broke. Maybe the relief of conversation, of something almost happening. The way in the morning, lying on the floor, the light through the blinds cuts my face. Less than hope, wishing. How sugar became snow poured over wet glue on a cardboard roof. I remember the paper house hung from a cage hook in my room, swaying. Not fonder, not fonder, the heart grows stranger. I am not any closer to saying what I mean. Love has made itself so quiet, a few red fish moving in slow circles. I want to say, like blood, like forgiveness, this obedience, looking at the ground on my knees. I mean, to cease to feel, to cancel, to give up all claim to. At some point, I rested my hands over my eyes and mouthed, "This is my face housed underwater. This is a love letter. Every word but mouthed, erased." Dear Kitty, dear God, dear Lucifer, I cut my hair off this morning, placed the long blonde braid in an envelope. There was only one arc: suffering, transformation. Dear Linda, Sexton wrote to her daughter on a flight to St. Louis, I love you. In other words, these words, their spectacular lack. I mean, my head is a napkin folded into a swan. I mean, these are death letters, an obsession with something colorless, private. You have been entirely patient with me and incredibly good. I want to say that. And then nothing but my hands unfolding the swan and smoothing it over my lap. Now my neighbor through the wall playing piano, I imagine, with her eyes closed. When she stops playing, she disappears. I am still waiting for the right words to explain myself to you. When there was nothing left to smoke, I drew on my lips with a pen until they were black. Or is this what it means to be empty? To make no sound? I pressed my mouth to the wall until I'd made a small gray ring. Or maybe emptiness is a form of listening. Maybe I'm just listening. Maybe the pain is see-through, clicking, as in my father pulling me up by the wrists, saying, "This is the problem with being alive." And years later, deliriously, when he was dying, "Do you have the blood flower?" I was taught to chant, he loves me not," as I tore off each petal in my room. You are not alone in your feeling of aloneness. Yes, I have the blood flower. So that's the complete first section of this book. And so I'll read, like I said, just a little bit from the rest of the book. I'll skip around, which is actually sort of horrifying to say, considering when I was asked last night about ordering the book and the meticulous process of ordering a book like this. But there is a difference between reading poems out loud and reading a book on the page. I think there are better reading poems than there are reading poems, if you know what I mean. So, I am writing to you as an act of immolation, relief. If each letter is a will, I want Juna Barnes' words written in the dust. The unendurable is the beginning of the curve of joy. Once I stood in a black dress at a bus stop and opened a clear umbrella, waiting for hours in a glass room. Dear world, I want now what I have always wanted. Scissors and someone to write to. Matches and someone to write to. I mean, the bowl I'm carrying is broken and filled with feathers. Whatever God is, something gentle inside, something ruined in the mind. Daydreaming, and soon, between my fingers, a filter and a long ash. Like a name repeated too many times, whispered mouth to ear. How I collected shells on the beach, but at home they were no longer beautiful. I want to make it last just a few minutes, like the first words I saw written in the sky. Laura, will you? Look up, my father said at the end of the Santa Monica Pier. Laura, I am writing to disappear. Tell me the first thing you loved and for whom you'd die. I held the match to my face and said, a toy lamb, my father. A game of loneliness. I would rather drown, go deaf. A game of loneliness. If the house was on fire, I'd save these letters. When my father died, I touched his mouth, said his word for sleep. At the bottom of suffering, like a lake, there is a ring, and I am reaching down. I am writing to you as an act of ending, cutting faces out of paper and folding them into envelopes like thoughts. Am I a monster? Clarice Lispector asked in the hour of the star. Or is this what it means to be human? To be alive, I think, as I cut another face. What makes the shape become visible and breathe is the angle and variation of absence. Sugar skull, I whisper, what I have known all along. I am you, gone. And this is the last poem I'll read. Or love, to be injured in the same way at the same time. After my father died, I drew a man in chalk on the living room floor and curled under his arm. This is to say, until the rain is streaming down the walls. Every page a pulse, Dickinson wrote in winter. Whatever happens after this, I am tired of saying a herd of black horses. A herd of black horses. And look how they run so closely together, like everything that hurts and can't be seen. Someday, I believe, in order to be free, what I say will trample me. Actually, I'm going to read one more. I skipped one. And this is a decent ending poem, too. And this poem refers to Virginia Woolf's beautiful autobiographical writing in a book called Moments of Being. It's her little section called Reminiscences, and it's probably the most extraordinary biographical or autobiographical work I've ever read. Maybe my arms lifted as a woman lowers a dress over my head. This is not what I want to tell you. Looking at red flowers on her mother's dress as she sat on her lap on a train is Wolfe's first memory. Then the sound of waves behind a yellow shade, of being alive as ecstasy. Maybe her mind, as I read, lowering over my mind. Maybe looking down as I sit on the floor at the book inside the diamond of my legs. Even briefly, to love with someone else's mind. Moving my lips as I read, the waves breaking, 1, 2, 1, 2, and sending a splash of water over the beach. What I want to tell you is ecstasy. Thank you so much for listening.